Great. So over to you, Colette.
Thank you so much. Welcome everyone to the first of two EU election hustings that the Wheel is hosting. Our next one will be on the 16th of May, and you can find out more about it on the website, and you can sign up or refer a friend to sign up if they wish. This is an opportunity for the sector to engage directly with MEP candidates, to hear what they have to say in relation to the sector and to ask any questions you may have. And as Emma said when she kicked off, please do use the Q&A function and we will be sure to get to your questions. I'd like to thank each of our candidates for joining me today. Kieran Cuff of the group of the Greens, European Free Alliance and the Green Party, Dublin constituency. Regina Doherty of the European People's Party and Fine Gael, Dublin constituency. Sinead Gibney of the Social Democrats, Dublin constituency. Brian O'Boyle of the Left in the European Parliament and People Before Profit, Midlands Northwest constituency, and Aon O'Riordan of the Progressive Alliance of Socialists and Democrats and the Labour Party, Dublin constituency. So we'll hand over to them soon, but first a brief background on this campaign that is bringing us all here today. So this is part of our EU election campaign. It was officially launched yesterday. It will run parallel and with the same overall themes and values as our local elections under the banner of The Future is Community. It asks MEP candidates to sign up to a pledge in support of the sector, one which acknowledges both the huge contribution of the sector in terms of the services organisations across the country provide, and also the challenges experienced by the sector, availability of funding, support for core costs, pay parity, to name just a few. The pledge has four main themes, so based on the values important to the sector: courage, to champion the causes of the community and voluntary sector at EU level, and for candidates to use their voices to speak up for civil society in Ireland and across Europe. Collaboration, to support Irish charities, community groups and social enterprises at EU level through initiatives like an EU match funding scheme, ring fencing of decentralised funding and streamlining of application processes so that EU funding is fairer and more accessible for everyone. Accountability, to model participative dialogue processes and decision making and work closely with groups at EU level that represent the sector, such as the Social Economy Expert Group, and to hold the EU to account in its implementation of its Social Economy Action Plan. Inclusivity, to work to build communities that are inclusive of all cultures and traditions, and to enable groups working in these areas to develop through access to EU funds while embedding the SDGs in their overall approach. We've ensured that all the candidates today are aware of these priorities and have been invited to sign our pledge committing to these principles. So along with the campaign for both the local and EU elections, we've also been actively engaging in the Ardeshina. So we have just finished Ardeshina season. This is my first weekend in about 5 weekends that I have free. I don't know what to do with myself. In November last year, we attended the Sinn Féin Ardesh. We were at the Social Democrats Ardesh in February, the Labour Party conference in March, and Fine Gael, Fianna Fáil, Green Party and Aim to Ardeshina in April. At each event, we've spoken to the party leaders and politicians and policymakers in areas of importance to the sector, and we'll continue to have follow-up meetings and engagement to advocate for the sector and to engage on shaping election manifestos. Just another point of note, we are also currently working on our pre-budget submission for Budget 2025. Having listened to our members in town halls, consultation events and responses to our members' policy survey and regulation survey, we're focusing on more of the things that matter to you. So we will still be advocating for increased core funding, for multi-annual funding, for proportionate regulation, and for greater recognition of the value of the sector as a key delivery partner, particularly in the area of health and social care. But we'll also be taking a subsectoral approach, advocating in key social, economic and environmental areas that our members have told us matter most to them. So several of the priorities outlined in our pledge, for example, the establishment of an EU match funding scheme, ring fencing of certain funds, etc., will also be echoed in that document. We'll have more on a launch date, but it's looking likely to be mid-June, and we'll also be running some pre-budget advocacy training for our members around that time. So we'll continue to keep people updated on all of that activity, on our pledge, on our pre-budget submission and our ongoing engagement with MEPs once elected. And we look forward to working with successful candidates to facilitate engagement with our newly elected MEPs and their constituents. So for now, though, we'd like to hand the floor over to our candidates, I'm sure at long last, who've joined us today to give them a chance to talk to the sector representatives here. Before that, just a reminder that if you have any questions again for our candidates, please put them in the Q&A function on Zoom. We'll pose them to our candidates after we've heard from everyone. So now I will start with Kieran Cuff of the Group of the Greens European Free Alliance and the Green Party. Kieran.
Right.
And I'm timing my 10 minutes.
Thanks very much. I'm sure I can keep to the 10 minutes. Look, it's been an extraordinary 5 years within the European Parliament. As you know, we kicked off in 2019 with Brexit for 6 months. That rapidly became the challenge of COVID, where a huge amount of our work was online. And no sooner had that calmed down a bit than we had to deal with the Russian invasion of Ukraine and more recently war in Gaza. But despite all those challenges, a huge amount of legislation has been passed over the 5 years. And I think a lot of the input from the Greens group has been to really prioritize the involvement of civic society in the making of decisions. I know, for instance, one of my own colleagues, Sergei Lazinski, has published a really clear document on the partnership principle in cohesion policy to ensure that civil society groups are involved in the making of decisions. But I certainly find that the belief and the enthusiasm for involvement of civil society is not shared by many of the larger groups represented within the European Parliament. And to be honest, I think some of them are very top-down and very hierarchical and not very transparent in how they go about what they do. I'm very proud, for instance, of the fact that every meeting I've had is recorded on the European Parliament's website. And that's one of the rules that we live by within the wider Greens European Free Alliance group. So it makes it clear who we met with. And it's a good reminder to ourselves that if you're meeting with a lot of business groups, make sure you meet with a lot of civil society groups. And that certainly is a principle that has informed my own actions. I think one of the challenges is to bring Europe back home in a clear and transparent way to the ordinary citizen. And I think the Wheel's own work, your own website, Access Europe, goes a really long way in providing the tools to understand how Europe works, because it is a very complex machine. When you've over 700 MEPs working together, we operate via 20 committees, and often the level of detail we go into is really, really detailed, and it can be hard for a civil society group to follow. But some very simple ways of navigating that is to find out who is in charge of a new draft law, who is the rapporteur, and to engage with them. And then also to engage with what we call the shadow rapporteurs, the representatives from each of the political groups. And they are generally quite open to a discussion. And these days, that's a lot easier to have in an online format. So it doesn't necessarily involve a trip to Brussels. One of the principles that the Greens are very proud of standing up for is the partnership principle in cohesion policy, which says essentially that member states, countries, have to consult with and involve civil society organizations when you're planning how to use the money that comes from Europe. And I think this principle is poorly respected across Europe. And we want it to be mandatory so that civil society organizations are involved in the design and the implementation of policy. Quite often, you only hear about Europe from a civil society organization when they're en route to Europe to voice their concerns about an issue. And yes, we do have a committee, the Petitions Committee, that can take the grievances of a group, ensure that they are heard, and propose a remedy. And the Petty Committee has done good work over the years in ensuring people have a voice. For instance, quite recently, on the issue of defective building materials in Donegal and the surrounding counties, I think it was very effective that local communities were able to go across to Brussels and make their voice heard. Another way of ensuring that you have a voice is by bringing groups of civil society members across to Brussels. I'm very proud of having brought a group from the Inner City Organisations Network, a group of women, over to Brussels last year. And it was a great opportunity to explain how things work and how they don't work. And I think that's hugely important, to talk about the good points of Europe and the less good points. So look, I don't want to go on at great length. I certainly would argue that I've been very open to engaging with civil society over the last 5 years, both in terms of face-to-face meetings, but also using social media and online meetings. And I will continue with that if I have the privilege of being re-elected to Europe. A huge amount of my work has been on the green transition, and we've made it clear it has to be both a green and social transition. We have to ensure that people are included, particularly in areas with high unemployment. We need to ensure there's retraining for the sunrise industries as people come out of the sunset industries. It's a challenging time in Europe. Freedom of speech is under threat in many countries. There's a war raging on our eastern borders, but I think it is important that we stand side by side with civil society in the remaining years of this decade, which I believe has to be a decade of transformation towards a greener future. Thank you.
Exemplary, Kieran, in timekeeping. Thank you very much for that. So the pressure's on for our other candidates. Regina Doherty, I am going to move to you next, please, of the European People's Party and Fine Gael Dublin constituency. Thank you.
Thanks, Colette. I don't even think I'll use the 10 minutes if that's okay, because what I want to concentrate on is the questions. But from my perspective, I think my history, and I've been privileged to be able to work with the community and voluntary sector when I was Minister for Social Welfare and Employment Affairs over the 4 years that I was at the Cabinet table. And the biggest thing for me that I would see differently to what we do locally here in Ireland and what doesn't happen in the EU is consultation. So we had the annual dialogue every single year in Dublin Castle, listen to everybody. That doesn't mean that we implemented everything that we were asked of us, but I think the listening part is hugely important, because if you don't appreciate what's going on at a very ground level up scenario, you don't get to make the proper decisions that actually have a positive impact. So what I would love to see is more interaction and cooperation and support for the voluntary sector from the EU. I'd also love to see, and whilst I understand and and I actually agree with this, that the social welfare competencies obviously should stay with member states, because not every country is going to have the same reasons for spending money where they spend. What we should be doing is an annual analysis of the supports that are available across every single country of the EU, to make sure that there is at least some consistency in the delivery of the outcomes. Now, I understand, obviously, that social welfare payments in one country would differ to the other based on standards of living, but there has to be an outcome-led analysis. The EU are very good at doing this about economic policy, but they don't seem to do it on social policy. We do it on employment rights. But I think the real core objectives of the community and voluntary sector, first of all, need to be consulted with. We need to analyse the data so that member states can then be advised, and maybe have a conversation once in a blue moon around the EBSCO Council that I sat on for 4 years, that really does concentrate on health issues, on employment affairs issues, on the work-life balance issues, but doesn't get to the core issues of alleviating hunger, of alleviating poverty, of making sure that we have minimum standards of living across all of the member states that are of a standard that we would expect people to not live, underneath. So consultation, cooperation, more support for the EU or the voluntary sector is what I'd like to see, and real hard data analysis to inform our decisions and our objectives, or at least our advice from the EU, if we're not going to interfere in local competencies. I think I have a good track record of listening, particularly over the 4 years. Some of the initiatives that I would have introduced, particularly around undoing some of the cuts that had been made by the previous government before I came to Cabinet, I hope helped some of the most vulnerable people in Irish society. So I hope I have some bona fides with my track record and can only, I suppose, commit to continuing that. I'm not interested in just representing one part of Dublin society or Irish society. I come from a very working class background, but I've shown that with the right opportunities and support, somebody like me who grew up on, in a relatively vulnerable part of North Dublin can get to the cabinet table, even as a woman. I think anything is possible when we support people who have good objectives. And I will continue to work hard with all parts of Irish society to make sure that we get better outcomes and better equality. Thanks, Colette.
Thank you so much, Regina. That's again exemplary thanking. So Sinead with the Social Democrats Dublin constituency, the pressure is on.
And I've got plenty to say, Colette, so I might get a little bit closer to 10 minutes. Thanks so much for the opportunity to chat today and to discuss these issues. And I'm going to just talk first of all a little bit about myself. And then really, I suppose, my take on kind of the civil society sector and how it interacts with the European Union and some of the things I'd like to see advanced if I'm lucky enough to be sent over as an MEP to Brussels. So first of all, in my last 2 roles as Chief Commissioner and Director of the Irish Human Rights and Equality Commission, I've had a lot of interaction with Irish civil society and European civil society. Certainly within Ireland, we had a key role in, I suppose, acting as a voice often for civil society and connecting that in many ways and Oireachtas on key issues, and also as a key funder for civil society, particularly promoting rights and equality-based work within the civil society sector. In my previous role in Google, I also had a lot of connection with NGOs. I ran Google Ireland's corporate social responsibility programs, and one of those programs was how we engaged with in-kind donation programs with NGOs directly. So I've really, I think over the 20 years of my career, really built up a huge amount of, strong network across civil society, and personally a deep appreciation of the work that's done in Ireland by civil society, where we really have seen over the course of the evolution of the state, so many just absolutely crucial social services taken on by actors outside of state bodies and instead by civil society. So I think it's part of our the fabric of our society in Ireland that I hold dear and that I feel is drastically underfunded and under-resourced, but I'll get into that a little bit later on. I'm delighted to sign the pledge, and I think it's very well set out in just establishing how we can act as MEPs to support your work. And really, when I think of civil society in the European Union, I think of you as the beating heart of European democracy, because NGOs and civil society more broadly, be it environmental groups right through to patient advocacy groups, they play such a crucial role in the European Union, and yet often they go very much unnoticed. But for me, a strong civil society is the engine that keeps the EU functioning effectively and democratically. And that's what I'd like to talk about under 3 headings. So society acts as a vital bridge, a powerful watchdog, and a hotbed of innovation. And I'm going to give you just a couple of examples under each of those headings. As a vital bridge, what I'm talking about there is between citizens and the EU. And Kieran spoke about the complexity of European institutions and the European Union more broadly, and how that can be potentially difficult to navigate for NGOs. But actually, what I feel is that NGOs are that bridge between the complexity of the European Union right through to its citizens, because you have roots in the communities, you translate EU policies into tangible realities for people. And I think you inform citizens about their rights and crucially give them a voice to express concerns and ideas. And that two-way flow of information that we see is really essential for the EU to remain responsive to the needs of its peoples. So a couple of examples that I would call out here is the European Environmental Bureau, which is a vast network dedicated to protecting the environment. It helps citizens to understand EU environmental regulations by making them accessible, and then advocates on the other end for stronger regulation and holds EU institutions to account. Secondly, civil society is a powerful watchdog, and having headed up what is often described as a watchdog organisation, not an NGO state agency, but nonetheless having that watchdog responsibility, I really feel that this is such an important role in society. No institution is perfect, and the EU is no exception. So NGOs, they hold the EU accountable, monitoring its actions and ensuring that transparency. They advocate for ethical practices and the upholding of EU's core values, which are human rights, democracy. And all of that keeps the EU on the straight and narrow, fostering trust and legitimacy among its citizens. So again, here are a couple of examples that I would call out are Transparency International EU, which works tirelessly to expose corruption, ensuring that EU funds and projects are used for their intended purposes. And they advocate for stronger anti-corruption laws and mechanisms, ultimately protecting taxpayers' money. And the Amnesty International's European Institutions Office, which keeps a vigilant eye on the EU's human rights record. They investigate abuses, they lobby for greater protections, and they campaign for the release of prisoners of conscience. And they ensure that the EU's fundamental values, again, are not simply words on paper, but actions in the world. And then thirdly, I would say that civil society is what I would describe as a hotbed of innovation, because NGOs are often at the forefront of tackling our most pressing challenges, right through from climate change to social inequality. They experiment with new solutions, pilot projects, and they raise awareness of issues that might otherwise go neglected. They're creative and problem solving and a real valuable asset for the EU in forming policy decisions and driving positive change. Groups like the European Disability Forum, who fight for a more inclusive and accessible Europe for people with disabilities. They champion new technologies, they pilot accessible transport systems, and they push for better policies to integrate people with disabilities into all aspects of EU life. Or similarly, the European Women's Lobby, we heard from them this morning. I was at the Women for Election and Women's Council joint hustings, and we heard directly from the European Women's Lobby, and they do such amazing work in protecting women's rights across the EU, particularly around some of the key issues of gender-based violence, gender pay gap, childcare, and work-life balance. And they don't just point out the problems, they really provide concrete ways that the EU can build a more equal society for women. And beyond those examples, I think we have to think of the countless local and regional NGOs who address everything from homelessness, poverty, discrimination, whether it's a youth group in Spain organising environmental cleanup days, or a patient advocacy group in Poland demanding better access to healthcare. All of these organisations and the many, many that we have here in Ireland, they all make the EU better. But of course, civil society isn't without its challenges, and funding is key amongst that. It can be precarious, and the shrinking civic space in some member states makes your work even harder. And I think although the EU does recognise that, the importance of a thriving civil society and actively supports NGOs, I think there's many ways in which we can see improvements. In my role as Chief Commissioner and leading IREC, we contributed into that rule of law report for the EU every year, and that's shrinking of civic space is one of the increasingly problematic areas that the human rights sector is concerned at. So one of the things, just to run through, and I won't go into too much detail on these, I'll save it if anyone has questions to please shout out in the question section. But I think, we heard from Regina about consultation, and I think sadly a lot of the consultation we've seen here at government level is often quite tick box, whereas really what I would like to see is much more meaningful participation, consultation which properly engages with groups. For example, if it's disability groups, that they must be DPOs, disability-led organisations, and we must weave it into the fabric of how we design legislation and policy, both at domestic and EU level, to make sure that the lives of those people who are most affected by those laws and policy are considered, that their voices are heard throughout the process. I think data, as Kieran touched on, is hugely important in terms of making sure that you as organisations have the resources that you need to make meaningful change. And resourcing and funding, and I read that new ICCL report, or just skimmed through it, which landed yesterday, which really talks about how here in Ireland there are restrictions on how many NGOs can access funding, which ultimately stifles their voice, and that's something that we have to address. And also when we think about funding, we have to think about it in terms of core costs, because in so many ways NGOs are just firefighting and limping along when they need core costs to be covered so that they can look into longer term goals and make sure that they have the sustainability that's needed to do their work. So in conclusion, a strong civil society is not a luxury for the EU. It is a necessity. It ensures democratic participation, it fosters accountability, and it drives innovation. And these are the cornerstones of a healthy and vibrant European Union. So I'm really thrilled today to celebrate civil society organisations, the true unsung heroes of the European project. And I pledge to be courageous, collaborative, accountable, and inclusive should I be voted in as an MEP. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that, Sinead. We were a minute away from getting the bell out. So thank you for that contribution. And now to Brian O'Boyle of the Left in the European Parliament and People Before Profit, Midlands Northwest constituency.
Thank you very much, Colette, and thanks to everyone who has attended. Yeah, my name is Brian O'Boyle, and maybe just a little bit like Sinead, I'll speak a bit about myself because I haven't been a public representative, and so just to give people a feel for who I am. I've been an economist in the ATU in Sligo for about 15 years, a member of People Before Profit for 20. I have 2 kids, and we live up here in Sligo. I would have said when I was asked to speak, I thought, well, how will I address this? Because I don't have a background in the charitable or the voluntary sector. But I would say that as a socialist, my values would start with 2 core principles, right? So one would be that every human being should live with dignity and should have the supports to reach their full potential, right? That would be one. And the second thing is that there's always an enormous social dimension to that in terms of how we live, how we have community, how we have social relationships with each other. And so things like solidarity, community, respect, inclusivity, social justice. And I think those are core values of socialists, and they're the same values that I see in the Wheel. I was just thinking about the situation in terms of people maybe who have disabilities in Ireland, and as I was looking at this, and I was looking at some statistics from Disability Federation of Ireland, which are saying things like 44% of those who have long-term illness are living in consistent poverty, for example, or 1 in 5 are in poverty itself. And so to my mind, that they have enormous consequences. Like the logic of the society that we live in currently is that profit really is the driver of everything, I would say. And that in that system, what we've had over the last 40 years in the European project, I think is a hollowing out of a lot of civil society. And I think it has made an environment where it's more difficult for people to build those kinds of voluntary support networks. Now, they're built in spite of all of that. And some of the stuff Sinead said was very impressive around the kind of watchdog functions and transparency and so on. But I do think it's important to be honest. And I think the way the European project is developing is away from the core values that I believe in. And I look at the system now and I think of what are the big challenges. So Kieran referenced the climate crisis. And in spite of enormously good work done by lots of people, we don't have a handle on that crisis. I mean, the truth of it is, I was at a hustings last night, and there are a whole range of far-right candidates now who are saying we're going to tear up the nature restoration law. We don't care about nitrates. We're, effectively almost saying that the climate crisis is a hoax. And I think that kind of politics is on the rise in Europe. Unfortunately, we're more likely to see a block of far-right candidates who will be in the European Parliament. And in that context, I think it's very, very important that genuine left-wing socialists will stand up and stand up for the environment, for example. I also think that if we look at, if you want to have a really vibrant civil society that has grassroots democracy, participation, people included in all sorts of, individual community all the way through to build a sort of a wraparound services for people, much of that is very, very difficult when you're living in a very neoliberal Europe, where increasingly wealth and power and influence are moved towards the top of society through the economy. Now, civil society does a really, really important role, and in fact, a really crucial role in trying to be a bulwark against that. But I think the general sort of dynamic and the logic and the kind of influence and the priorities of many of the parties in Europe, including the EPP, for example, are towards the profit-making sector effectively, rather than the community sector. And that to me is a real problem, because it's hollowing out our democracy and it's hollowing out our civil spaces. And then I think, this is also about our wider priorities. And I think if I look at Europe, Kieran referenced the war in Russia and Gaza. And I mean, in some ways, Sinead, if only the values of the European Union were, universal human rights and universal dignity of all, because I see people like Ursula von der Leyen saying things like, Netanyahu has a free hand to effectively murder children in Gaza. And when Putin does these kinds of horrible things to people in the Ukraine, she would rightly call that out. But when her allies in big power politics does the same things, they effectively row in behind the big power interests, as opposed to the human rights and the values that the European Union is meant to stand over. So, I just think it's very important. The reason why I'm standing in the election is because I do genuinely believe in the values of, as I said, social justice, social solidarity, genuine dignity of the individual. And I think those values are really strongly on show in your organization. I'm very happy to be here to take questions and listen to them. But I also do think it's important to be honest and say that we're in an environment where free speech is under threat, there's less tolerance, there's more division, there's more anger, there's more scapegoating. And in that environment, people who really rely on civil society are going to struggle more, I think, because the state has consistently let them down. And without a really vibrant social society, the people that you represent, I think, are going to struggle if we don't reverse the tide. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much for that, Brian. And finally, we come to Eoin O'Riordan of the Progressive Alliance of Socialists and Democrats and the Labour Party Dublin constituency. Eoin.
Thanks very much. And I don't think I'll need the 10 minutes, but I'll give a brief explainer as to why I'm running in this election and who I am, like others have. So yeah, my name's Eoin O'Riordan. I'm originally from Malahide. I live in Marino. I have been in politics 20 years. Previous to being in politics, I was a teacher in Sheriff Street, which politicised me to get involved in politics. So I've served time on Dublin City Council. Until 2011, I served time as a TD, as a Minister of State. I've been in the Shannon, I'm back in the Dáil, and I made the decision to run for the European Parliament after November the 23rd. Because what I've seen is Dublin really under massive strain over the last number of years. I'm in Leinster House most days of the week, and the energy in Leinster House is about rural Ireland and the needs of rural Ireland. That's absolutely legitimate and needs to be aired. But I feel there's an imbalance in national conversation about Dublin. Dublin is really struggling. Housing is a massive issue. Homelessness is a massive issue, and the housing issue is really impacting on the cities and the county's ability to provide public services. People will say that's not an EU competency, but the Social and Democratic group are hoping to make it an EU competency and to tackle the state aid rules that would limit local authorities' capacity to deliver on social affordable housing. But I also agree with what Brian has said about the toxicity of Irish politics and how it's turned a corner in a very, very dangerous way. The phrase NGO is now one that's part of a culture war, which I think we have to fight back against. We can see the poisonous nature of political discourse, how the far right are getting much more emboldened, how they're trying to reach into different communities, and they're having success. Because I can see a number of mainstream political parties inching towards the right when it comes to basic rights and their position on things such as hate crime. So, and I also look at the European Union, which is a project that the Labour Party has always supported, has felt it's been good for Irish people, it's been good for Irish workers. A huge number of the rights that we now take for granted emanated originally from the European Union, and we wanted to defend those rights and to promote them. But we are, as I've said, at a very dangerous crossroads. I see the rise of the far right across Europe. I see, homophobia going mainstream. I see anti-migration rhetoric going mainstream. We see what's happened in Ukraine. We see what's happening in Gaza. We've seen the United Kingdom actually leave the European Union. When I was a Minister of State, it was my responsibility for dealing with a huge number of groups who had such decency at their hearts and needed to speak to a minister to put their point across. And I know Regina will have had that experience as well. So I dealt with a huge number of traveller groups trying to get traveller ethnicity over the line, which we successfully did. Drug lobby groups, asking me to prioritise things such as decriminalisation of the drug user, or indeed the legislation to provide a safe injecting facility in Dublin, which we legislated for. Migrant rights groups as well, new community groups, disability groups has been mentioned as well. One of the issues that I'm trying to focus on is actually disability unemployment. I was at an independent living seminar yesterday in Blanchardstown, and it was interesting listening to what they had to say. I was prepared for issues of transport, issues of employment, issues of housing. What I wasn't prepared for was footpaths being such a basic provision by a local authority as an arm of the state that are, you know, discommoding people and humiliating people on a daily basis. And I think when you strip away maybe sometimes the high level, you know, conversations that politics is often about, and actually talk to people who have lived experiences of having a disability, it can really come down to much more basic things and things that we can really work on together. But on the unemployment thing, people with disability in Ireland, the employment rate for disabled people in Ireland is 32%. The average in European states, EU states, is 51%. So we have a body of work to do there in terms of empowering people in that sector. So look, what I'm trying to do also is to be an advocate for Dublin, because I think there's a Dublin-wide election, and I think I want to put Dublin back as a priority, a political priority for the next 5 years. I think the European Union is quite remote to Dublin citizens, or indeed Irish citizens. I think, and I wouldn't accuse Kieran of this, but I think there are a number of MEPs who get elected and you don't see them for 5 years. They're not relevant to political culture here in Ireland. It's not relevant to political debates, to campaigns, you know, to what people's lives are like. And we saw that with Brexit. It was like there was 30 years of the EU not promoting itself day in, day out in the lives of Irish citizens, and then when the question came as to whether people want to leave or not, there wasn't enough, if you like, a bank of positivity in the tank in British society for people to want to remain within the European Union. And I think that's something that MEPs have to do to be more relevant, to be here, to not disappear, and to be, you know, a relevant part of Dublin life and of Irish life and Irish political life. So, as I've said, and others have said, I'm absolutely delighted to sign up to the pledge. But I do have a concern about where Irish politics is going. Quite a number of political parties are finding it difficult to get candidates to run. It's becoming more toxic, it's becoming more abusive. And it's not just about people in politics, it's NGOs, as I've said already. And we have to be absolutely determined to speak truth, to advocate what is right, what is just, what is decent. And I think the European elections gives us that opportunity, and the next 5 years for all of us potentially being MEPs allows us that opportunity to bring the EU more relevant to people's lives, and also to open up our ears as politicians to listen much more necessarily than we talk, which is what I'm hoping to do for the rest of this seminar. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Aon. So that concludes all of the contributions from our candidates. Thank you to all of the candidates for sharing their plans, for sharing how they're going to work with the sector should they be elected. And now I'd like to move on to questions from our audience. So Emma has been monitoring them as they've been coming in. So I'm going to hand over to Emma now. Thank you, Emma.
Perfect. Yes. Okay. So some of them are a little bit long. I might need to condense them just for timekeeping sakes, and so that we're not just watching me reading out things off the screen. But the first couple are very short. So Jane Roberts, she asked 2 questions. The first one is around whether the candidates are in favour of a ban on the live export of animals to non-EU countries. And also the next one, I can put them both together. Do you support the full implementation of the End of Cage Age European Citizens Initiative? End the Cage Age European Citizens Initiative. So I can hand over there, and Sinead has her hand up first.
Thanks a million, Emma, and thank you to Jane for the question. I can confirm that our SOCDEM policy is in favour of banning the live exports of animals to countries that have poor animal welfare protection, and we will obviously be carrying that policy through to European level representation as well. Animal welfare is a key part of our policy platform, and all of the details are available on the Social Democrats website if you'd like to run through there in terms of domestic level. And obviously, once we get to European level representation, we'll be developing that for European policy level. I'm not familiar yet with the End the Cage Age European Citizens Initiative, so I'm going to take time to learn more about that one. And there's been a really great bunch of different organizations getting in contact, as they do during election time, which is really helping me to learn more about what is needed in this area.
Thank you, Sinead. The next person was Regina. So over to you. Thank you so much. Just to say, so we don't have a position on this, 100% yet. But what I'm very aware of is that, to answer the both questions, is that our farming communities are against signing up to both of those things. So I think what we actually need at an EU level is a trade deal that's based on climate and human rights and humane practices that we can all agree on. So at some point, and this is the beauty of the EU and the way that it's not necessarily just political party siloed structures, is that we can agree and give a little and take a little. That if we all sat around at the committee and decided that we wanted an EU agreement that was based on human rights, climate at the heart of it, but also humane principles for our animals, I think we probably could reach an outcome that we would all agree on. And it isn't just a case of that we can say we can do it to some countries and no countries. It's the practice that should be, have an equilibrium to all countries. So whatever we uphold as to being a high standard, we uphold for all countries. So that's what I'd like to see.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Regina. I think Kieran was next.
Yeah, I mean, the End the Cage Age is a European citizens initiative. I think 1.4 million people have signed it. It's an issue that has been central to the Greens campaigning over the last few years. And we also want to see restrictions on live animal exports that reflect the conditions under which the animals find themselves, and that they're not stuck out for weeks on end in extraordinary temperatures in the Mediterranean Sea en route to Egypt. We had an animal welfare committee in this mandate, in this 5-year term of the Parliament, but its powers were eviscerated by the European People's Party, and the conclusions were really limited. And I'm sorry, Regina, to take issue with you, but your colleagues in the European People's Party would not allow us to make any progress on animal welfare. And it's an area where I'm hugely concerned at the influence of your political group at a European level. I work well with many of your colleagues on issues of common concern. I worked really well with Sean Kelly on the Greener Buildings Directive, but when it came to animal welfare, there simply was no movement from your group. And I think it is important that we have people in Europe who are committed to improving animal welfare over the next 5 years.
Thank you, Kieran. Next is Aon.
Yeah, to agree with what's been said. I mean, with my own personal position on question one would be yes, but also to say the Cage Age European Citizens Initiative is not something I know a huge amount about, and I'm not ashamed to say that. I think in politics we often have people who try to bluff their way through answers. I don't know what it is, and that's why I think platforms like this and interactions like this are important. But on the animal welfare piece, there's a huge amount of sort of culture war stuff happening in Irish politics at the moment. There seems to be like people are digging trenches all over the place, and we're not in a position maybe to have more nuanced discussions on things. So yes, live cattle exports, I've given my position on that, but the other one is something I'm just going to have to learn more about.
Okay, thank you, Aon. And finally, Brian.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, Regina made a good point there about the farmers, because I was at a hustings about the IFA last night, and I do think it's important that we go back a step. Aon made a good point about the nuance, right? And the nuance is that farmers in Ireland are increasingly in crisis, right? The farmers themselves, there was 9,000, I think, left the industry in the last few years, and their margins are so low, they're so squeezed that they often feel like the only way to make a living is to cut corners, is to think about doing things that they don't really necessarily want to do, like, make animal welfare a lesser priority or the environment a lesser priority, because they just can't survive otherwise. So to my mind, the kind of core of it all, absolutely we're against in people before profit live exports. We're absolutely for animal welfare, and we have a policy that says all of that. The End of Cage Age, like Aon said, I didn't know enough about it, but I had a quick look at it there, and yeah, I would be very much in support of that. But we also have to recognize that it's the logic of profit in the end that's driving a lot of people into situations where they're doing these kinds of things. So, I saw that RT documentary, and it's an outrageous thing to think that we're treating animals in that way. And so we have to break that logic that everything has to be subservient to profit. And I think that's core to, going beyond just the specific of the policy to the wider or the deeper problems we face. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Brian. That's excellent. Just a reminder to people, the Q&A function, please do put your questions in now, so that we have a good few here to get through. So I'm going to try and give everybody a chance to be heard if at all possible. And just to our candidates, after each question, I might ask you to put the digital hands down, because it is handy for tracking who came in when. So the next question is from Emma Armshaw of SWAN, the Sustainable Water Network. And it's around a recent, I have to condense some of them because they're quite long. There's a recent report from the Marine Conservation Society found that the bottom trawling overlapped with 4,000 square kilometres of special protection areas in Irish waters between 2015 and 2020 or 2023. And Ireland missed the deadline to submit an EU Marine Action Plan, which should include a roadmap to banning bottom trawling in these areas. Can the candidates outline what they would do to ensure better protection of our ocean and prioritise passing a ban on this destructive practice? So anybody want to come in first? I'll keep an eye on hands. Perfect, Kieran.
It just took me a while to get to the raise hand.
You're right.
Took me a while to get to the raise hand function, but I want to see a ban on bottom trawling. It is incredibly destructive of our marine environment. I remember 12 years ago, I hosted a screening of Charles Glover's The End of the Line in Leinster House, which was about the huge risks to our fish stocks around the world. And that continues. I mean, we've seen a recovery in some fish stocks, but in many areas, and particularly for bottom feeders, we're seeing stocks at all-time lows. And my colleague Grace O'Sullivan sat on the PESH committee, the Fisheries Committee of the Parliament, over the last 5 years, and she found it soul-destroying to see that there is a political majority in the Parliament to continue with very destructive practices. But I think the Greens have a very honourable track record on wanting to see an end to bottom trawling on the seas around Europe. And I think there has to be greater recognition of the real risks to our fish stocks. I was at a Wind Energy Ireland conference speaking yesterday, and I was on a panel with the head of Bord Iascaigh Mhara, and I spoke about the real risks to our fish stocks, and I was a little bit upset that the head of Bord Iascaigh Mhara, she didn't say enough about the problems we are experiencing globally and in Irish waters with fish stocks diminishing. But I think a ban on bottom trawling is part of that. And look, the marine space is going to come under a lot of pressure over the next few years in terms of protecting nature with marine protected areas, in terms of ensuring that fishers can continue to fish, but also with the huge pressure to install offshore wind energy. I think we can find a balance between all of three of these. And actually, I don't think it's a zero-sum game. I think actually setting aside areas for wind energy allows fish species to thrive because they won't be fished out of the wind farm areas. And there's good examples from Denmark, from the east coast of Denmark, of fish species doing well in proximity to offshore wind farms because trawlers are limited in being able to drag up everything on the ocean floor.
Okay, thank you, Kieran. Brilliant. Brian is next on my list.
Yeah, one thing one of the challenges here is that there are a lot of people who have a lot of expertise on a whole range of things that maybe I certainly don't have on, and it'd be good to maybe hear a bit of dialogue. It's difficult when we're saying we want inclusivity and dialogue, and then we're just getting hit with like blank questions. It's hard to actually hear. But anyway, on the point, I suppose, without sounding like a broken record, I think dialogue is important here, right? Because I'm going up next week to Killybegs for a session with the fishermen, right? And I'm not sure if it's Irish fishermen or if it's Spanish trawlers or whatever that are mainly doing the bottom trawling. But the reason they're doing it is just what I said a minute ago about the reason why farmers are sending things to live export, which is that margins are low, volume is key, profitability is necessary in order to continue, and that overrides everything else. So everyone works on a base of self-interest, narrow self-interest in a system of competition. And in that system, you set up fishermen against environmentalists. You set up, everyone's individual interest gets set against each other, and it becomes, do you ban, do you regulate? And the problem with all of that is that, banning it is environmentally really important. And at the other side, you're probably then denying people who need a living. So to my mind, how we break that sort of impasse is to have more proper grassroots democracy and looking at why it is that the environment is so damaged. Why are we damaging the environment so much under capitalism? And the reason for it is that the profit motive is driving people away from thinking communally, long-term, towards that sort of logic. So again, I can't answer very specifically on it. It does seem like a very destructive practice. I do think it probably needs banning, but it also needs some dialogue with the fishermen to make sure that they're protected.
Okay. Thank you, Brian. Regina is next.
Thanks. You know, for me, I think it's easy for me to say this. I think we need an EU-wide ban on this particular practice. But the only way that that's going to happen is if we have member states, and some of them are larger fisheries than we are, and we'd obviously be up there with the big ones, agree to it. And some of my colleagues would like to paint the picture, you know, that left parties are good, centre and centre-right parties are bad, in a kind of a white hat, black hat scenario, which is completely untrue, given that we have Spain being ruled by a socialist government, a member of the S&D party, and they're the ones that would block it immediately. So I don't think, like, I think Brian is right when we talk about nuance. What you do is you agree around the table and you give a little and get a little. And Kieran's position on things is that he wants to get everything but isn't prepared to give. And so I think the beauty of the European Parliament, when it works, is that everybody compromises to get the best possible outcome by agreement. I am concerned, though, to be honest with you, because it's happening even off our own coast of Dublin in Dunleary, where our fishermen are objecting to the new wind farms that are going to be put on the coast of Dunleary because of the fear that they have of wind is going to damage the fish. Where Kieran is right, we've had ample examples of where we have wind that have had no impact on fishing and the trawl that you can get for the fishermen that are currently there. So we definitely need more dialogue, more reassurances. Brian is right. We have our farmers and our farming communities and our growers very concerned about their income, as everybody should be. And yet we continue to blame them for practices or lack of changes when those changes are going to impact their income and we're not doing anything about it. So there's nuance to everything, but there's also compromise that can get the best outcome for us, even if it's in incremental steps. But we need to get people around the table to have a ban, an EU-wide ban, and we only do that by agreement.
Okay, thank you very much. Sinead, I think you're next.
Thanks, Emma, and thank you for the question, Emma, as well. Yeah, I mean, I think as the Social Democrats have regularly put out, I think what we're looking for is sustainability here. So I think that does require a ban on these super trawlers. And I think obviously we've had confusion in the law here in terms of that court ruling in 2020 that was overturned. But we do also want to see, at least until any ban is introduced, that there is effective monitoring, and we're not seeing that at the moment. So that's just the one thing I would add to what has already been said. Thanks, Emma.
Okay, thank you very much. And Aon, you're last.
Yeah, I want to agree with a lot of what's been said. Howth is in my constituency, and you know, I have an interest in this area, and I'm happy to agree with what others have said in terms of bottom trawling. But we've had two questions so far, and both of them about banning something, and that's fine. But if they feel like very black and white questions, and I think the beauty of politics sometimes is, as I said before, is the nuance, is the listening, is the balancing of ideas and pushing things into a certain direction. So you know, that is something that I've noticed that has really happened in the last number of years when it comes to Irish politics, that there's a black and white. Maybe I don't hate to agree with Regina's suggestion about the right and left, and then everything of the left being good and everything of the right being bad, because I probably would come from that persuasion. But however, she is right to say that things aren't black and white, and that there does need to be a level of communication and compromise, which is sometimes a bad word in Irish politics, and nuance, as I come back to. So while yes, I would be happy to support a ban for the reasons that Kieran has outlined, but like I said, this is two questions in, and both of them are about bans, and you know, I'm interested to hear what the rest of the questions will be about.
Great, thank you very much. Okay, we'll their next question is actually from Stephen O'Rourke, who's one of the independent MEP candidate for Dublin, and this question is in relation to his professional work as a regulatory scientist in healthcare and biotech, and in keeping on the topic of today. So it's about the increasing strain on our healthcare systems in Ireland. What concrete role do you believe that the EU should play in fostering innovation in healthcare, which could help alleviate some of these issues here at home? So does anybody want to jump in and put their hand up to answer that one? There we go. Sinead, I think you're first. Great. Oh, I can't hear. I think you're still on mute, Sinead.
Sorry about that, Emma. Sorry, I just wanted to check, did we miss one from, did you skip one from wildlife rehabilitation?
I just wanted to space out some of the environmental questions. So
okay, fair enough. Okay, we'll skip over to Kieran and I'll put my hand up again. I just want to make sure we weren't missing that. Thank you.
Yeah. Oh, right. So sorry, I can go then to Kieran, who was next, just in terms of a healthcare question. So we'll go to that one and then we'll come back and we'll just space out some of them. So,
yeah, I mean, the extraordinary thing was when the pandemic kicked off, if you spoke to anyone, they would say, well, the European Union has no role or competency in healthcare. And actually, we've acquired various competencies over the last few years. And I think one of the more important competencies is in terms of gathering data. And we agreed quite a controversial piece of legislation last week in Strasbourg on sharing of certain patient information to try and have an impact on long-standing medical issues around Europe. It could be inherited diseases, genetic traits, and clearly this is an area that is really fraught with ethical concerns. But I think we struck a pretty good balance on the file. I think we will see more powers going to a European Union level to think about health concerns, because I think we've learned from the pandemic that many health issues are best addressed by 27 countries working together rather than in competition with each other. I think there's a real enhanced role for research, and the Horizon Plus program has huge scope and already focuses quite a bit on healthcare issues. But I think there is scope to increase that in the coming years. And also in terms of innovation, and I was out with the Irish Pharmaceutical Manufacturers Association along with Sinead a few days ago. And I think there is a need to work with industry to ensure that innovation makes its way in healthcare, makes its way through to the general public at a reasonable price. For instance, we're seeing these extraordinary advancements in drugs to treat obesity being developed in Denmark, and we've got to ensure that they aren't out of reach of ordinary citizens. So I think there is an increased role for the European Union in healthcare. We absolutely have to strike the right balance between the profitability of new treatments and ensuring that they are accessible to the general public. And I think that will be an important issue in the years ahead. One last thing I'd say, I mean, we don't have a health committee per se, we have an environment and health committee, and that concentrates quite a bit on clean air and clean water. And we know from the European Environmental Agency that, for instance, poor air quality kills over 300,000 people prematurely every year. So we need to continue to improve the quality of our air and our water. And this is one of the lessons we learned from the pandemic, when we saw much higher instances of mortality in northern Italy in the industrial zones. So one of the last takeaways I'd say is the sooner we move away from fossil fuels, from oil, gas, diesel, the better. And I think the green transition can give major healthcare benefits, and it's important that we optimize them in the years ahead.
Okay, thanks, Kieran. Aon, over to you.
Yeah, I'll try and be as brief as possible. I mean, look, I think the vaccine rollout did prove how effective the EU can be when there's a major pandemic, which, you know, and there may be another one. And that was an important point. Membership of the EU was very beneficial in that regard. It's not just necessarily just about the EU competencies and commitment and legislation. It's also about, like I said before, about bringing mainstream European knowledge of how different health systems work to here and to campaign here. Now, one of the biggest health issues that I campaign on, as people will know, is hopefully people know, is the drugs issue. People will say, well, there's no connection between that and the European Parliament. But I do feel if you look at across Europe, how different countries have dealt with the drugs issue, many have decriminalized the drug user, have so many European countries have injecting facilities, overdose prevention facilities. And certainly if you look at Portugal, which decriminalized the drug user in the early 2000s, have seen a 50% reduction in the number of people in heroin dependency programs and a 75% reduction in the numbers of fatal overdoses. Now we have between the third, depending what report you read, third or fourth highest overdose rate in Europe. So that's something I think bringing back that expertise from European member states to Ireland to campaign on that, because yes, it is about legislation and directives, but it's also about, I think, a campaigning MEP who can bring that sort of expertise back and say, look, this is what's happening in member states. We are isolated from that discussion. Let's have this discussion here. And if there's one area of healthcare which is really an issue of massive inequality that I really want to focus on, and absolutely agreeing with Kieran there on respiratory illnesses and the effect on transport policy and fossil fuels, etc. But the drugs issue is something that I'd really want to spend 5 years working with communities in order to bring to reform to.
Great, thank you very much. Regina, you're the next one with your hand up.
Thank you. Thanks, Emma. First of all, can I just say, I didn't catch the gentleman's name, but I did read on his question earlier on that he's also a candidate in the European elections this year, and just to wish him the best of luck wherever he's running. I totally agree that the EU should play a larger role in fostering innovation in healthcare. And you can see we need to have a health data space where we can safely use the data that we collate to help innovation. We need to protect to an extent the IP rights and therefore the foreign direct investment into companies that are developing their technologies within the European Union. But I also absolutely believe that we need to develop the single market to allow those countries to act, or to allow those companies to be able to grow their markets within the European Union. And Kieran was right, suggesting a number of years ago that the EU said they don't have any competency with regard to healthcare. I think Ursula von der Leyen showed that we can if we want to during the COVID crisis. I know that Aon said we might have another pandemic. I hope to bloody God that we don't have in my lifetime, because the last one was enough to put grey hairs on everybody's head. But we absolutely do need to recognise that we can have competency and use our power and our magnitude for good. The cancer strategy is obviously an example of that. Now, it does need to be updated. It wasn't updated since 2021, but we can do it and we should do it. And absolutely, we need more money for Horizon. Excuse me, just to encourage and foster that EU research that we do here locally for issues that we have locally based on the companies that are actually based here and that want to invest in the European Union.
Thank you very much, Regina. Brian.
I would have a different vision, actually, I think, than Regina, because I won't caricature at all, but the idea that IP right, I think there's a problem with that, because intellectual property really privatizes knowledge. And I think if you go and have a look at the kind of practices of the pharma industry, they're increasingly interested in capturing value as opposed to innovating around medicines, I would say. I mean, even with the COVID, most of the information and the knowledge that was created in public institutions, and then it was partnered with private companies at the end. And Aon's right to say that it was a really successful rollout for us in Europe, but it was a really, really unsuccessful rollout for people in most of the world. I mean, most people, because of intellectual property rights, didn't get COVID vaccines, and the vaccine could have been far more successful if more people had gotten it initially and there wasn't all these secondary mutations. I just think that the general principle for me would be that public healthcare provision is better than private, right? For a couple of reasons. First of all, prevention is much better than cure. And prevention isn't a business model for pharma companies, because they need chronically ill patients to continually buy their products. Whereas I think if you had public healthcare, nutrition programs for kids in schools, for example, would be much better money spent than billionaires trying to find out genetic ways to stay alive for an extra 2 years. At the end of a life of 90 years already. So to my mind, the European project has to be seen as, an umbrella under which public medicine becomes the norm. That's a very big challenge. Obviously, it's an aspirational challenge. But I think if you look, for example, at America, right? America spends the most money per capita on its medicines. It has the worst health outcomes in the OECD and the most unequal outcomes across all of the developed world. And it's the most privatized medicine. So to my mind, the evidence base is around public medicine, and we should be advocating for more public medicine across the EU, and then seeing how that then feeds into our system. And I think, as I said, preventative early medicine and more equality. Actually, there's a really good book called The Spirit Level, which talks about equality being a driver of good healthcare outcomes. So actually, the more equal your society is in the first place, the less you need innovations around medicines and care, because you have a more healthy society.
Thank you, Brian. And finally, Sinead.
Thanks a million, Emma, and thanks, Stephen, for the question. And likewise, best of luck in the election. I believe you're running in Dublin, and sorry that we can't hear your voice today, but great that you're able to at least contribute with these questions. I think in answer to your specific question, which is about the concrete role that the EU should play in fostering innovation, I was really interested to attend the IFA launch last week, the Irish Pharmaceutical Healthcare Association, their manifesto launch, which really kind of reminds you, I suppose, how important that industry is here in Ireland. We have such a hub here for the pharma industry, and really how important it is to just foster that innovation and make sure that we are creating jobs with sustainable medicine. But also, I think probably where my interest most lies is similar to Brian in terms of that access issue, ensuring that healthcare is available to all. And I think although during COVID, we saw a new side to the European Union in terms of how we can operate as a more unified union when it comes to healthcare, we stopped short at the shores of the European Union, and we failed to act as a globally responsibly, I think, in making sure that the COVID vaccine was available elsewhere. So that would be my take on it, is that, I mean, besides kind of fostering that innovation here at home, we also need to make sure that the European Union plays that really key role in ensuring access to healthcare for all citizens. Great.
Thank you very much, Sinead. Okay, I'm going to group two questions together that are quite similar. The first one is from Patricia Ryan, who's a representative from the Wildlife Rehabilitation Ireland, from Wildlife Rehabilitation Ireland. She wanted to ask about support. The two questions are around animal welfare. So it was support for hare coursing, how the candidates feel about that, and then about the biodiversity emergency. Do they feel that Ireland needs to put money into that, bearing in mind the amount that is given to chasing hares legally with dogs? And lastly, do you think wildlife crime is a serious issue, and can they explain? So that's from Patricia. And then Jane Roberts from Ethical Farming Ireland also asks about a ban on the long distance transport of unweaned calves in Ireland. And what are your thoughts on the RT Investigates documentary on the trade last summer? So just grouping those two animal welfare questions together, just for the sake of time. And I think, Kieran, you have your hand up first.
Thanks for that. Yeah, I mean, I think when we get into the level of detail, such as a ban on hare coursing, I don't think we've had a debate or a discussion of these very specific animal welfare concerns at a European level. But as I said, we did set up a committee on animal welfare. And Regina, I've spent much of the last 5 years working by consensus and working in moderating what I would like to see in response to how others work. But I think the Animal Welfare Committee was unusual in that there really was a line drawn in the sand that we weren't allowed to cross to improve animal welfare in any meaningful way. But you're right as well, Regina, that we have to work together. And I think the best example of that in the area of biodiversity and wildlife is the nature restoration law. And I think it has significant implications for cherishing and restoring biodiversity around Europe. But I think the file was weaponized by certain actors, if you could call it that, who really said that if you pass this law, we'll no longer have Santa Claus. And the messaging, that was the messaging from the European People's Party. And I don't want to kind of put the boot into Regina's party too often, but I thought the messaging around the nature restoration law was cartoonishly amateur about the NRL. The fact of the matter is that we have lost a huge amount of our biodiversity over the last 30 years. And we do need to protect it. And we do need to work with farmers. And I think it's important to sit down and find common ground. And all too often, the voice of farmers is the voice of Copa Cogeca, which is a very industry-led organization, which seems to prioritize the use of chemicals, prioritizes industrial farming. And I think there's not enough voice from the small farmers who, as Brian is saying, are feeling the pinch when they're being held to ransom by the large multiples, by below-cost selling, by price reductions, let's say, in the price of strawberries in the month of June, just when you want to make your maximum profit. So I think the challenge to farming is not the need to protect nature, it's the very low prices that are being paid. And I think there is a real role for the European Union to ensure that farmers are paid a decent wage for the hard work that they do. And that in turn will allow us to provide more safeguards for nature and more safeguards for animal welfare. And we need to be vigilant, because on the one hand, there are voices in the European Union saying we'll protect nature, but there are also voices saying we have to completely liberalize trade. We have to have the Mercosur agreement. We have to have an agreement with Canada. And we're not getting the reassurances. And it's an unlikely and an unusual alliance, but I find myself on the same side as the Irish Farmers Association in saying we've got to look at the threats from Mercosur, because it could be very damaging for Irish farmers. But I think we can find a common ground, but it does require moderate voices on all sides to agree on the need to not only protect our climate, but biodiversity is the other side of the same coin. And within that is an implicit need to give protection and good welfare to animals.
Thank you, Kieran. Sinead, you were next.
Thanks a million, Emma, and thank you to Patricia and Jane for the questions again. So we do support the banning of the use of live hairs and hair coursing, along with the prohibition of wild animals in circuses. And that's, again, stated in our own animal welfare and rights policy, which you can access. I mean, I think it's really interesting to hear the discussions around farming. I think what you see in Holly Cairns, our leader in the Social Democrats, is somebody who really embodies, you know, it is not a homogenous group in farming. There are plenty of farmers who are, you know, absolutely on, I believe, the right side of this discussion in terms of biodiversity and climate, and who appreciate more than any of us the precious resource that is our planet. So I think we have to acknowledge that there is a lot of diversity within the farming community, and really kind of foster the voice of those farmers who want to move to more sustainable practices, who want to shift direction, but currently are being hampered by policy both at domestic and EU level. So I think, I mean, I won't go into much more detail. I did see the documentary last year, which I think was just a shocking piece of television for so many people, and I think it did an incredible job in raising that issue for just within the mainstream general public about the animal cruelty procedures. But again, I mean, I think Holly and then Jen Whitmore as our biodiversity spokesperson have been really strong on these issues in terms of making sure that our policies are progressive on these. Thank you.
Thank you. Aon is next.
Yeah, thanks. I didn't see the documentary, so I can't speak to it. But I do know. I mean, I made this point at the Sandyford Business District hustings we had there a number of weeks ago about workers' rights, and that, you know, this doesn't need to be about digging trenches. We have to have, as Kieran quite rightly said, a level of conversation about these issues. On hair coursing, I'm against. But I do see it's not necessarily just governments and opposition that are involved in this debate. I see the level of toxicity and the poor leadership, I think, among farming organizations. I mean, Kieran has been quite generous there to the IFA, but there's others in that sector who I think have been getting quite politicized, quite personal in their political advocacy, and I think that needs to be hauled in. I see, you know, there's a fund that the government votes for annually called the Horse Greyhound Fund, which I am incredibly critical of. I think it's a legacy going back to the McCreevy era of the mid-90s of politics, where 100 million euro a year of taxpayers' money, which is a direct levy on betting, goes directly into the Horse and Greyhound Fund. 80% of that is spent on the horses, and 80% of that is on prize money, which is tax-free. And this is unquestioned, voted in annually. And there's any amount, and in fairness to the Social Democrats are being quite strong on this, of issues within the greyhound industry in particular around animal welfare and that entire area. But it's almost as if you can't have a debate around this fund. It's as if it's not up for discussion. It's one of these sacred cows, pardon the pun if you like, of Irish politics. But I think we have to be better than that. And when we have so many other, sporting organizations or pursuits in Ireland that, would absolutely benefit from a direct link between a gambling levy and an outdoor pursuit, I wonder what it is about this industry that is so powerful and that wields such power and cannot be interfered with by anybody at all. And by the way, if you do question it, you get absolutely dumped on. But yeah, look, I think I've said what I want to say there. But I was interested in the comments on the nature restoration law, and those who supported it and those who didn't, and those who welcomed it, even though their parties have voted against it. I thought that was an interesting development when the vote took place.
Thank you. Okay, so Regina, you're next.
Thank you. I just would tell you that I think although hare coursing obviously would be a national issue, so therefore would be decided by member states individually, I think where the EU's power comes from is setting minimum standards, and we should certainly do that. The defence obviously of the likes of hare coursing is that it protects participants in rural Ireland for practices that they've had for years. But obviously we have to have all of society acting at a human and an animal dignity perspective, so that there's a level of which we wouldn't go below. I think it's interesting, and I'm not sure why Kieran is so intent on continuously having a pop off me. The reason the nature restoration law was passed through the Parliament was because my 5 Fine Gael MEP colleagues voted to save it. And he is right, they voted against the EPP, which actually shows the benefit of having Fine Gael not only in the Parliament as part of the biggest bloc, but brave enough to make decisions that reflects Ireland's responsibilities and the needs of Irish society when they're making their decisions. And so they made the decisions in the best interest of Irish nature, Irish biodiversity, and the absolute need for that. What's interesting is that one of the countries that blocked it, Austria, is run by a Green government. And so we've got a little bit of a tit-tat going on here, and I'm really not sure what it's about. But my own aim is to make sure that whomever we send to the Parliament acts in Ireland's best interests, regardless of what group they're in, and to be brave enough to be able to step outside that group when you need to make a bold decision in Ireland's best interests. The other question part of it is wildlife crime a serious issue? I think it really, really is. And particularly when we look at wildfires in other countries that are a result of either malicious behaviour or climate change, we need to absolutely make sure that we do put money behind protecting our wildlife, not just biodiversity, but the entire wildlife ecosystem. And I think that's something that I would love to see happening, not just at the EU level, but also at national level.
And thank you, Regina. And Brian, over to you.
Thanks very much. Yeah. I mean, it's an enormous issue, isn't it? The issue around, I was reading a statistic around biodiversity loss a while ago, and it was saying that since the 1970s, we've lost 50% of all of our wild animals. It's an incredible thing. And I mean, another statistic that they had was that of all the living animals in the world, not sort of bugs and so on, 94% are humans or are domesticated animals now. And that there are more cows in the world than all the wild animals put together. And I mean, in lots of ways, that sort of encapsulates the whole problem that we face, right? Because of that, land use is completely dominated by grazing and changes in the Amazon, all that stuff. So I think the logic and the drive for a nature restoration law is absolutely essential. It's really, really important to do. I had a quick look because I was going to the farmers, and it was saying that only 15% of our habitats currently are in conserved status or whatever it is. They're being well conserved, right? So I think that's really important. I think the idea of hare coursing is really barbaric, and I think it's something that socialists are very happy to say that we would be against. But this is where I do think what Aon and Kieran are saying is important, right? Because I would slightly distinguish that from the issues where farmers come in, because like whether we like it or not, and I would say I was in a minority last night when I was asked, are we for live exports? I said no. I know the Green Party said no, but most of them didn't say no, right? And particularly the fascists, they were very delighted to say absolutely yes. And so, I mean, they were jumping around saying it's amazing. And the point I'd make is that if you look at what the IFA were looking for, right, two of their big asks are less regulation. They say we're being over-regulated, and they want a nitrates derogation. And so even though in their document they recognize that corporate power is a problem, they talk about a lack of value in the value chain going to small and medium farmers, they don't have the confidence to ask those bigger corporations to pay fair prices for their labor. And so then they say, well, how can we live? And they say, well, what we have to do is cut corners on the environment. And therefore, they're all against the nature restoration law. Well, they're not all against it, but a lot of farmers feel that this is a trade-off between their living standards and the environment. And wouldn't it be great, instead of having that as a trade-off, we could actually afford the farmers enough of a living that they had a stable living, similarly with the fishermen, that they had economic security and autonomy enough to then do what they want to do, which is steward the land properly. So I think it's very important we have dialogue. And, you know, banning it's kind of like the lowest common denominator, because it ends up that one group feels alienated and the other group feels vindicated. And what we actually want is to get to a point where we say, who's winning in this system? Why is our environment so damaged? Why are our animals being sacrificed so much? Why is there so little power at the grassroots level? And it all comes back in the end, to me, to capitalism. And like, people don't like talking about that. They think it's like alien language. But in the end, if you have a logic of capital, and that logic is profit and endless accumulation, then you get all of these secondary problems down the chain. And that's what links them all together.
Okay, thank you very much. In the background, Colette is very helpfully grouping questions for me, so that for time purposes that we can kind of try and cover, because we've had lots of really interesting questions, and we want to try and touch on all of them, but we might not have time to individually answer. So we're going to try and group them according to theme. So thank you for that, Colette. And then also we might try and keep answers brief so that we can get through them all. Would be great. So we'll try and be a little bit more brief. I might have to start getting stricter. There's a couple of questions around, one from Breach McGrath and one from L. Cummins. It was around the view on the direction of the EU as a global actor over the next 5 years. There's a recently leaked briefing book to DG and INTPA proposes a new doctrine for the EU for a world driven by economic interests in a world of competing power blocks. How should the EU position itself? And then there's also a question, I suppose, relating to the sector. This one's from L. Cummins, and it's that our sector, community volunteer organisations, are really struggling with the level of discrimination that is happening in communities right now. It is hard to feel supported by the EU or believe in their commitment to human rights, especially with the level of inaction around Gaza and the high level of action taken in Ukraine. The inaction highlights more that the rights of some are more important than others. So on how do you reconcile this at EU level? So those two questions, I hope they're clear. I'm just grouping them together. There's a world of competing power blocks. How should the EU position itself? And how do you reconcile the imbalanced action of the EU on global issues, according to this question? So Sinead, your hand is up.
Thanks, Emma, and thank you both Breed and L. Cummins for the questions. And I'll keep it as brief as I can, but I think firstly, we need to return to the origins of the European Union. I think we have veered off course, but the European Union is a peace project, and that must be our absolute priority as you say, a bloc in a world where war is just absolutely taken off in the last few years, war and conflict. We need to be the absolute broker and voice of peace within that. So I think, I mean, that would be, I mean, we've heard some of the concerns expressed today and in all the different hustings I've been attending. I mean, the predictions are that we are going to see a lurch to the far right and to popular next European Parliament, and that is a real concern, because it signifies that we will see rollbacks on progress, and it also positions us in a really problematic way at a really difficult and crucial and delicate time. So for me, I think it's absolutely important that we stop sending voices, middle of the road voices, to Europe who will do nothing but cozy up and pander to that far right, and instead send across strong social democratic left voices who will actually mitigate and counteract those in government, those in the European Parliament, who would roll back some of the progress that we've seen. And I think specifically in relation to GAVA, I'd like to just put on the record here and now that I will not support a second term for Ursula von der Leyen. I don't believe that her actions have been appropriate in response to the absolute devastation that we're seeing in Gaza. And I think we have not seen from the European Union the leadership that we all would have hoped for. The Irish people have expressed very clearly their solidarity with the people of Palestine, and the European Union needs to respond in kind. So I'll leave it there. I could go on a lot longer on that one, but I know we want to get through all the questions, so I'll hand over to my colleagues.
Yeah, there was a little tiny break in the mic, but we could still hear everything, so don't worry about that. Aon, you're next.
Yeah, I really want to agree with Sinead. Look, I think this is probably one of the most, I know we always say this, for the most important European elections ever, because it is quite likely that we will have a lurch to the right after this election, with any amount of very, very nasty actors being, holding the balance of power within the European Parliament. We can see it rise to the far right, right across Europe, Netherlands, Italy, Poland, Hungary, etc. And Ursula von der Leyen is not part of the solution; she's part of the problem. She is the problem, and she has to take accountability for that. And I thought her actions when it came to Israel in the early October were absolutely abhorrent. Absolutely apparent to what the European Union, as Sinead quite rightly says, was established to achieve. It came out of a Second World War. It came after millions and millions of deaths. It was a commitment that we would never go down this road again. And I do feel like I'm in Leinster House. I know Regina is, others are. And I go out every day, and we have the Ukrainian flag on the projected on Leinster House, and that is right and just. But it feels completely smug at this point, because it's so if you like, not even-handed. It's that there was a kind of a moral certainty internationally about Ukraine, which absolutely the Labour Party supported and wanted the Russian ambassador to be expelled, etc. But when it came to Gaza, there's more equivocation. Now, the Irish government has been quite strong, and one of the most strongest voices in Europe, and that has to be said. But I feel, and I think many people agree with this, that until we have an international absolute boycott of the Israeli state on every level, economic, sporting, cultural, academic, they are not going to stop what they are doing. This may cease. This may, come to a kind of a crossroads, if you like, but it'll be returned. And I'm a child of the 80s. I was born in 1976, but I do remember the 80s as my childhood decade, if you like, and what happened with South Africa. And it was only when the international community came together and said, no, sorry, there's a threshold of decency here, and we cannot engage with this country until it sorts itself out. And that, I think, has to be the view of the European Union. But again, this is about, I think, standing up for that basic threshold of decency, which I feel that the European Union always did, but it's really at a massive strain now. And when Ursula von der Leyen, plays politics and tries to do deals with these parties of the hard right, who are basically racist in their outlook, well, then she is part of the problem. And my group in the European Parliament, the second largest group, are hoping to be the largest group and to unseat her as European Commission President.
Thank you, Ian. Brilliant. Okay, Kieran, you're next.
Well, I'm delighted. I'm not completely singled out as the only one critiquing the European People's Party and Ursula von der Leyen. Regina, it's important to say in the case of Austria that your own party colleagues are a major party in government there, the Austrian People's Party. As is often the case, the Greens are a minor partner, not the major partner in government. So just worth remembering. I think it's important as well to recognise that von der Leyen is being certainly vilified in the Irish political discourse at the moment. But if we get rid of von der Leyen, what is the alternative? It may well be Manfred Weber, her colleague. And if you think von der Leyen has been problematic, Manfred Weber could well be worse in many regards. But I think the question was about the world of competing power blocks. And it's important to look beyond what's happening currently in the Middle East and look beyond von der Leyen, to look, for instance, at the influence of Borrell, the High Representative for Foreign Affairs and Security. And I think Borrell has spoken well in the discussion on the Middle East. But I do think in Middle Europe, in Germany and Austria, the Holocaust and the memory of the mid-20th century casts a very long shadow. And I spend a lot of my time just trying to initiate conversations about what is happening in the Middle East. And I think when you look at the influence of those other power blocks around the world, of China, of the United States, of Russia, I actually think for the most part, the European Union has had quite a positive influence in terms of development aid, in terms of getting vaccines to countries that need them, not in the quantities that are required, but actually, I think the European Union has done better than many other power blocks, such as Russia or China or the United States, on this one. And I think the challenge for the next 5 years is to ensure that human rights are in focus, not just on the borders of Europe, but all around the world. And people often ask me, well, do you spend much time talking about Brexit these days? And my stock answer is, actually, we don't. We're much more engaged with discussions with Moldova, with Georgia, with Ukraine, about the accession progress and about how far we can go over the next 10 years. And it's worth remembering that just outside Europe's borders, there are many countries that want to be part of the European project because they see it as being democratic, they see it as being much more transparent than their country is, and they want to be part of this process. And they also recognize the role of the External Action Service of the European Union in reaching out and having offices in countries like Albania, and in talking about the need to have systems of justice that are transparent, in having procedures that bear international scrutiny. So I think we should be careful not to beat Europe up too much as we can be very critical, and rightly so, of von der Leyen and her failure to adequately criticize the state of Israel. It is worth realizing that Europe has a lot to offer the world of global politics. And I'm proud of many of the instances in which the European Union has been a voice for sanity and democracy and support in recent years.
Okay, thank you, Kieran. I have Brian next. We've got 3 other categories of questions that we'd like to get to, that we've grouped. So I'll try and get people to keep answers brief, because it'd be great to get to all of them before we have to finish up in 20 minutes. So sorry, Brian, over to you.
Okay, yeah. The first thing I would say is I like the question, because the idea of competing power blocks is exactly how I see the world. And it was that kind of logic of imperialism and big power politics that caused World War I and caused World War II. And increasingly now you hear actors, whether they're generals or key members of the more right-wing parties, saying things like we're in a pre-war phase. I was watching Question Time and somebody said we now need to give military training to all our civilians in order that they're battle ready for the potential for a conflict. And this language is like, to my mind, is so alien. It's madness that we would be even thinking in those sort of terms. So Putin is a warmonger, absolutely. I mean, people before profit sometimes are accused of being soft on Putin. So let me make sure that everybody knows. We went down to the Russian embassy when he invaded the Ukraine. I myself have protested in Sligo against his delegations because of their position on LGBTQ people. Putin's a thug, right? His politics are about domination and control. But if you're in Damascus or you're in Gaza or the West Bank or basically the whole Middle East, the main fear you have is of the other bully boy, which is America. And unfortunately, a lot of our politicians legitimize the Americans, and they play the exact same role as Putin, but they're legitimized by Irish politicians because of economic necessity or because of their own considerations. And so I think the left has to be honest and say that we want to be with neither. We want to protect our neutrality. We want to keep the triple lock. We want to see Irish any military campaign in the world. The only thing Irish people should be doing is going as peacekeepers. And I think the way we've done it for 50 years has brought a lot of honor on the country. People know that we've gone through a rigorous process before we send people off. And that, you know, has given us a sense that our soldiers are safe. The idea that we'll be more safe by getting into an arms war or by lining up or losing our neutrality, to me, is ridiculous. The way we keep ourselves safe is not to go down that path. And just finally, I know you asked for brevity, but I do think the question of Gaza, I mean, you know, Sally Rooney said it is the greatest moral and shocking catastrophe of our time. And like, we have to think very, very deeply about what that means, because if that can happen to other people's children, right, it can happen to anybody in the world. And so the European Union has not done anything really. It has not sanctioned. Aon is absolutely right. We need complete and utter boycotts on the Israelis now. They are a pariah state, an apartheid state, and we need to boycott them. But the European project says some good things, but nobody has done any action. And to my mind, that's a deep, deep moral failing of the European project.
Thank you, Brian. I'm going to go to Regina and ask you to be brief, and I can then do a summary of the next question then.
Thanks, Emma. Just to briefly answer the question about how the EU can act as a global actor in the next 5 years, I think what we need to see is better partnership with developing worlds, including Africa and Asia. And on that basis, not on the basis of economic power, but on the basis of equality. I think we need to do more around global trade, around values, around climate justice, around social justice. And I think the EU is good at that. And I think I'm positively disposed to how long it's taking for Mercosur to be agreed, because we're not giving in to the deforestation requests, you know, just because this trade deal, we don't just agree trade deals just because it's a good thing. We need to make sure that there's, you know, conditions within that actually does uphold the values of the European Union. And with regard to Gaza, I think I'm very proud of the Irish leadership that has been shown by Leo Varadkar, by Micheál Martin, and by now more recently Simon Harris. They're the people who are shaping the minds and changing the viewpoints of other European actors, as we've seen over the last couple of months, but we've a lot of work still to do.
Thank you very much. Okay, so the next question, the next theme is about health, and we have kind of two questions under it. There's one from Annie from Cree Heart and Stroke Charity in Ireland, and then Adrian Carroll, who's the Senior Policy Officer as I Am, Ireland's Autism Charity. So the question from Annie from Cree Heart and Stroke Charity is, will the candidates, if elected, will they actively call for cardiovascular health, for cardiovascular health to be a key priority of the future European Commission 2024 to 2029, and to turn cardiovascular health plan into a priority for Ireland? She talks about it's the leading cause of death in Europe. It's 36,000 deaths a year, 10,000 of them in Ireland. And then from As I Am, they talked about, well, they'd like to ask the candidates about disability and the European Disability Strategy and the European Pillar of Social Rights. What will you do, if elected, to promote disabled people's right, ensure freedom of movement across the bloc, and access a full range of rights, the same as other citizens? So hopefully, so there's two questions there, one around prioritizing the cardiovascular health and making it a priority in our policy making, and then one around promotion of disability rights. So I can see that Sinead's hand was up first. As brief as possible, please. Sorry.
Yes, I will keep it as brief as possible. And thanks, Emma, and thanks, Annie, for your questions. And some really, really interesting and very, very stark statistics that you're sharing with us there. So I am just going to straight up say I do not kind of know the broader areas to say where this sits as a priority. It shouts to me that it is something, obviously, when it's claiming so many lives at both the EU and our domestic level, that we need to prioritise, that we need to plan for. So I'm going to make sure that I look into it more in my own planning around healthcare policy at EU level. So thank you for raising that with us. And then on to Adrian's question. And hi, Adrian. Thanks for your question. I think there's so much we can do, so much better we can do at EU level to support people with disability. I mean, we heard some of the statistics earlier around access to employment, but really, I think we need to just shift the understanding of disability, both at domestic and EU level, from one of a social model or a medical model of disability towards a rights-based one. If we start from the viewpoint that everybody in this, in Europe, has the right to participate in employment, in education, in housing, in public representation, from the viewpoint that we then need to dismantle the many, many barriers faced by people with disabilities that currently exist in Irish society and European society. So I will be doing everything I can to promote the rights of people with disabilities and to make sure that participation is promoted and facilitated. And one of the ways I think, and I mentioned this already, but just I think it's so, so important, is that DPOs are foregrounded for this. So disabled persons organisations, which are headed up by people with disabilities, where we have voice of lived experience shaping that policy and being able to influence the law and policy that most impacts their lives, is one of the things that I would absolutely prioritise. So thanks for your question, Adrian.
Thank you very much, Sinead. Regina.
So to answer to both questions is a yes, very simply. I think we could replicate in the EU what we've done with the cancer plan with regard to cardiovascular. But I think the question was, could we have a national plan? And we absolutely should have a national plan. And second, to answer Adrian's question, like, I fully support, obviously, the rights of people with disabilities to get equal access and have freedom of movement across 27 member states. And we have seen that some countries are absolutely less than glorious in how they treat them. So what we need is common standards and guarantees in the European Union to set those standards.
Perfect. Aon, you're next.
Yeah, but very quickly, yes, to both questions. I do have a bit of history working with as I am in particular. The Labour Party brought forward the 3 motions in the last number of years on autism and the need for a national autism strategy. I deal with a huge number of parents and family members of autistic people who are absolutely and obviously autistic people themselves, absolutely exasperated with the lack of services, the not timely manner in which they can get assessments and interventions, and therefore they can't look 5-10 years ahead as to what their lives will be like. And the employment piece is an important one that I raised earlier about the number of people in Ireland with a disability who are in employment. I'd also make the added on a point about mental health. I think we haven't really had a proper discussion about what the pandemic did to mental health, particularly to young people. I think we're still feeling the effects of that. And it's something that's actually coming really evident to me over the course of this election. The level of anger out there in Irish society, which is also something that needs to be, it is a health issue and it's a mental health issue. And I think it's something that needs to be prioritised too.
Thank you very much, Aon. Kieran, you're next.
Thanks for that. Yeah, I mean, obviously I fully support the aims of what CRE is looking for. But I do want to voice a little bit of concern, because I think over the last few weeks, we're seeing different health concerns coming to us as pledges where we sign away and say, we will absolutely commit to this. And in a sense, there's a bit of option politics to it. Is it stroke? Is it heart disease? Is it autism? And I think really what this is pointing towards is the need to have a comprehensive health strategy at a European Union level. And I think the kind of the focus that we've seen on cancer over the last few years, again, what about the minor or rare diseases? And I think it's not a good position to be in public life, to be kind of selecting one health concern over another. And I think we have to have an umbrella, a policy that covers the spectrum of health concerns and that has a comprehensive response to that at a European Union level. But with CRE, I worked with the Irish Heart Foundation 10 years ago when we were encouraging actually lower speed limits in Dublin, because we recognized that obesity and sedentary behavior are a real challenge and kill hundreds of thousands of people every year. So we need to get people active. And this is something I have really stressed in my work on the Transport Committee over the last 5 years, to make it easier, as you say yourself, Aon, to get the footpaths resurfaced and stop cars parked on them, bikes cycling on them, bins stowed on them, to have decent ways of getting from A to B and back again on foot. I also agree with Ingrid on a rights-based approach, because I think we have to look at this through the lens of rights.
Okay. One
small piece of work that we completed last week in the final voting session in Strasbourg was the establishment of a European disability card. And this will ensure that there's a recognition of a person's disability assessment across the 27 countries that are part of the EU. And there's also, so there's a card, and there's a parking card, which, you know, help in a small way. But there are much wider, broader issues, as Aon says. The impact on the mental health of young people by the pandemic has, I think, been enormous. And I think we will struggle with this for many years to come. So I think this all points to a much greater role for health, and particularly preventative health, over the next 5 years at a European level.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. And yeah, I have one more question. It'd be great to get to before we finish up. So I'll hand over to Brian, and then I'm going to lump together the last couple of questions into one, and we'll do a rapid fire round. So Brian, over to you.
Yeah, well, I concur around the importance of cardiovascular health, and I also concur with the idea of preventative medicine. So, like, we have to get creative. I think one big thing, we live in such an obesogenic environment where high processed foods are the norm, and sedentary lifestyles, and people are working in much less active roles in their jobs, and then coming home to high levels of technology. It's very difficult to know where to start, but one good thing would be to start looking at cooking, you know, home ec or some sort of nutrition in schools from a very early age, to teach people how to have practical skills. There's lots of scientific evidence that says if you have those skills, you're in a better place in terms of being able to prepare your meals. But it's complex, and I think, you know, in the end, Cree do an excellent job, but we need to think much more carefully about the levels of stress in society, the levels of anxiety in society, the reason why people are living less healthy lives. In a, you know, when we have much more wealth, we seem to have much less health, and that's a problem. The issue around disability rights, I have a nephew in Australia who's autistic, and he would be severely challenged. He didn't speak until he was 7, but every year he gets about $45,000 or $50,000, which is vouched. Now, it's in the private sector, so I'd be slightly against that, but it has meant that he's in mainstream school. Their vision is that every child has the ability to reach their potential, and when they do that, they cost less in terms of cost benefit analysis, because down the road they're working as opposed to being cared for by the state. And so I think our state has actually a really, really bad record. 10,000 people still waiting for over a year, 6,000 kids waiting for an assessment of needs. Like, you know, this is a real indictment of where your priorities lie in society. The Irish government have signed the UN Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities, and then they've opted out of the clause that actually holds them to account. So to my mind, you know, we need to get real and really support people who need that support.
Brilliant. Okay, thank you. Now, like I said, I'm gonna lump together 2 questions here that aren't actually related, but I just want to try and get to everybody's. There was another marine and biodiversity question, but I think we've covered that earlier. And this is on, there's 2 topics here. It's around civic engagement, and then I suppose around arts and creativity. Heidi from Future Ireland asks about the role, what would you see the role of the public participation networks, the PPNs, and in terms of playing an active participation in EU decision making. So what's the role of the PPNs in connecting to EU decision making? And then Felicity Maxwell of IAF Communications asked around how would you support creative arts organisations and artists, which often challenge the status quo and contribute to mental well-being. So I'm going to ask you all to be as quick as you possibly can in bullet points, please, because we'll do we'll get a few words from everybody, and then we'll round up with one brief information slide. So Brian, you're first.
Okay, yeah.
Oh, maybe, sorry, had you already got your hand?
I should have lowered my hand, actually, in fairness. Yeah,
well, okay, no worries. Well, I'll give you time to think because you just,
right.
So I'll go with Sinead and I'll come back to you, okay?
Thanks, Emma, and thanks to both Heidi and Felicity for those great questions. I actually really wish we had more time to spend on both of these because they're fascinating. I think because honestly, in terms of the public participation network, it hadn't crossed my mind actually that it is a potentially really cool tool to use to create better connection between EU decision making right through to our communities. And I think the public participation in some ways a success story. I know that there is a real problem with consistency across Ireland in terms of how those PPNs have been established, how they're well resourced and how they're run and everything else. But to me, they are a way in which we are coming some way back towards the kind of social contract that we used to have. And I think such an important part, along with family resource centres, participation that we need to see. And I think you're right, they could be a really strong way of connecting us both and alongside local authorities as well. And I know there's the committee of now the Committee of Councillors or whatever it is. Like there's many ways I think in which we can do a much better job of connecting EU and decision making at EU level with local communities and the incredible work that's been done there. And I think, as I set out in my first statement, I think that's such a crucial part of our role as potential MEPs. And then in terms of the creative arts organisations, I mean, this again is something that's really dear to my heart. I was at Children of the Sun on Wednesday, a great play that's currently running. Some really important concepts in our current time. So for me, I think the arts is such an important part of Irish culture and something that we have to nurture, and we have to make sure that we support homegrown arts organizations and artists. And I think, you know, for me, particularly during times of war, I studied equality studies, a master's there, and I did a module in liberation psychology, which has a fascinating take on how arts is used to really help people through trauma. When you find it so hard to articulate, for example, the ongoing trauma that you're experiencing, that you can express it. So I think in the times that we are in, where people are facing such challenges, it is more important than ever that we invest in arts. So I would be pushing that absolutely, should I be successful. Thank you.
Sinead, there was a little bit of interference with your mic, but we heard the context of everything. So I think it's understood. So Aon, over to you.
Yeah, I'll be brief. I might focus. Well, look, I agree with both. You know, the answer is yes to both questions. I'll focus on the arts, if you mind, just in terms of time.
Yeah, go for it.
Because look, I mean, the irony about UK politics is that the Tory party used to cut the arts, and then the Labour Party used to fund them, and then it gave a platform for people to slag off the government. So it's kind of self-defeating almost from the Labour Party in Britain. But Sinead is quite right, is that it is the space in which those on the edges of society often find their voice. If I mentioned the people I spoke of earlier, the traveller groups, the people in addiction, you know, people with disabilities, migrant groups have always used the arts in order to talk of pain. We're not good about talking about pain, about trauma, about intergenerational disadvantage, etc. There is an issue in Dublin about the loss of cultural spaces, about the loss of that public space that's been sucked out of the city, and it feels as if it's been hollowed out. And that's why very much my campaign is about Dublin, and it's called For the Love of Dublin. Is our motto. We're trying to be positive about what Dublin can actually achieve. This government has been good for the arts. I think the minister has been good. In fairness to her, what she has done in terms of basic income for artists, but it's more than just that. It's also about the spaces in which art can take place. What the European connection with that is, don't overemphasize it, but I certainly do believe, as I said at the beginning of this, that we do need campaigning MEPs who are more as much live to the political scene in Dublin as they are in Brussels, and that's why I feel so strongly about it. I once was a playwright myself. I wrote 2 plays, Os Gaeilge, as a young emotional man, and I deliberately wrote in Irish so that nobody in my family could understand what I was saying, and they're on stage in the Tyvark. True story.
Brilliant, great theatre. Okay, so Regina, over to you, as brief as possible, please.
Well, of course, we're all going to have to go and find Aon's planes now to see what an emotional young man he was. 2 questions. Absolutely, PPNs can play a more active role, the same way as the ILO does, the way IBEX do. You know, we need to get them into the commission, and I think that's up to the commission to ask them. And second of all, we absolutely should support the arts. I love Aon gave the current minister the credit that should go to myself and Josepha Madigan, because it was both of us that started the pilot for our artists back in 2019. But actually, we should be going further. And Aon is right. We can see a diminution of artist space, of galleries, of just freedom for people to be able to express themselves. And that's something that we should be doing nationally here, not blaming the EU for whether it happens or it doesn't happen, but they should be supporting us. Yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Excellent brevity. Brian, over to you this time, coming back to you.
Yeah, I'll be quick as well. I mean, I think socialists have always had the value of bread and roses, right? So it's about the idea of having your material needs met so you can express yourself, your creativity, learn about the world, and, you know, and be a fully rounded human being, right? So I think the arts are exceptionally important. I saw a documentary last week called Gaza. And in a way, it can touch you in a much more profound way than any political speech can, because it really gets to the essence of the humanity of the situation and allows you to sort of feel the humanity of the people. So the arts are absolutely essential. I think the basic income is a very good idea. And if Regina was involved in a fair play to her, I wouldn't just make sure she doesn't think I'm a complete sectarian. I'm not, but I do think it should be rolled out more generally. I think artists do struggle way too much with their material needs, and therefore they're making this trade-off between their creativity and their ability to live, which is terrible. And with the Public Participation Network, I'd love to learn more about it. It seems to be a network that links the various voluntary sector to the local authorities. The little I know is that local authorities don't have enough power as it is, but that idea of linking them seems to me to be a very good one. And I'd like, if I was elected, to certainly listen and learn and see how I could support that. Thank you.
Brilliant, thank you. And Kieran, in under a minute, please, over to you.
I'll do my best.
Okay.
It's always good to see basic income, the success of that scheme. And I think success has many fathers and mothers, and that certainly comes across the political spectrum, that people are proud of what has been done by many contributors, which is good. At a European level, we have the European Social Fund Plus, and that is really tailored to improving social exclusion, social inclusion, tackling poverty, and it has huge ability to cultivate the arts and to cultivate the voluntary sector, and I think push us a long way in the right direction. Within the Parliament itself, we have the Cult Committee, which is the Committee on Culture and Education, and it does a lot of work in safeguarding both our cultural heritage, but also in promoting artistic creation around the 27 countries that form part of the Union. And more recently, the new European Bauhaus has been really promoting placemaking, promoting the arts, promoting design, and the new European Bauhaus Festival took place in Brussels a month ago and is providing support for creativity and design by awarding prizes to organizations in each member state. So there is a role that should be developed in that area, and I think there is a real scope to increase this in the years ahead.
Thank you very much, Kieran. That is brilliant. That was a kind of marathon of questions there. Thank you so much to all the candidates. I'm going to, in a second, I wanted to share a slide just very quickly about our next hosting so that we can let people know if they want to tune into that one as well, and about our pledge where people can find out information. But Kailash, do you want to, while I get my slide up, do you want to say any last words?
Yeah, thank you so much, Emma. And again, congratulations to all the candidates for keeping their initial remarks so brief, because we had such a range of questions. So we really appreciate all of your time and consideration in taking all of those on. Thank you also for sharing your plans for working with the sector should you be elected to the European Parliament. And just a final thanks, I suppose, to everybody who stayed for the duration, to all of you who came and who gave your questions forward. It was great. It really livened up the whole thing. So again, to Kieran, to Regina, to Sinead, to Brian, and to Aon, thank you very much. And just over very quickly, Emma, you have less than a minute to show us what's going to happen next. Thank you.
Right, just very briefly, just to say that we have two of these events. This is the first one, obviously, and you met all of our candidates today. Here are our candidates for the next one. We've got Paul Gavin, Niamh Horgan, Billy Kelleher, MEP, Cian Prentfield, and Maria Walsh is also City MEP. So tune in next week, if for in a couple of weeks' time, 16th of May, if you'd like to hear from those candidates as well. And you can also find out more about our EU election pledge, which we've talked about and referenced throughout today's session. If any of the listeners would like to find out more about that and read more about the pledge, they can just go to wheel.ie EU elections, and that's also where they can sign up for the hostings if they like as well for the next one. And that's it from me. So thank you very much, and a huge thank you as well from me to all the candidates and to everybody who listened in today. That's it.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Claire. Thanks, Emma. Thanks, everyone, for coming.
Thank you.